Let's unbox the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch scale Blurrg and the Mandalorian.
Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it.
Hello there, thanks for visiting Varykino. I'm really excited about this particular item, which is of course the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch scale Blurrg and the Mandalorian. I was really excited to see the Blurrg finally revealed as coming soon in a Hasbro live stream earlier in the year, and I have to say I'm actually really impressed with how quickly I have this in hand from that original announcement. So for us here in New Zealand, there isn't any local stockists that actually have this one either in stock or for pre-order, so we had to order ours from Australia because I was not missing out on this one. I love the creatures and beasts of Star Wars, and sadly we don't get them in the action figure lines as often as I would like. The Blurrg was a really cute animal in the first season of The Mandalorian. That was a few years ago, so it's taken a little bit of time for Hasbro to finally release it, but the day is finally here. It's here and I can't wait to open it up. And of course we also have included a Mandalorian figure, which I'm hoping will fit on top of the saddle and be able to ride the Blurrg really well, and I'm going to be opening up that carded figure as well. I can't wait. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, of course, we'll open everything up. We'll go over all of the details, the paint, the articulation, everything. But first, let's take one last look at the packaging. Of course, the Vintage Collection packaging, it takes a lot of inspiration from the original Kenner action figures down to having the Kenner logo and a lot of the same design elements. But it's really fun to see these two side by side. Here we have, of course, the modern Vintage Collection Blurrg and Mandalorian figure. And here we have a Return of the Jedi 1980s era speeder bike vehicle box. And we can see just how many of the elements from these packaging styles that this one has replicated. Of course, we've got the logo here up the top and the name in white text, and of course all of the imagery on the boxes is of the action figures, the toys themselves, not elements from the movies like screenshots or promotional images. It's really fun to see these two side by side and just seeing the really fun sort of nostalgia coming through with the packaging styles being replicated on these brand new toys. This is really quite fun. So I'm just going to carefully pop this one out of the way now so we can take a closer look at all of the details. I really like the promotional imagery that they've used here. Of course, it is a little bit different to the standard action figures because we don't have a promotional shot from the show, but the toy photography of this particular Blurrg item is really clever, and there is a lot of images scattered all over the box. On the front here, we have a single chrome racetrack, no Star Wars logo or Mandalorian logo cutting into it though, and we've got a really nice clear promotional image here of the Blurrg with the accessories like the saddle and reins attached. We have the Mandalorian figure standing off to the side with his armband rifle and soft goods cloak there as well. We can see that the figure inside of the Mandalorian is carded as well. I'm very excited to take a look at that one there. We can see that this one is noted as being the Arvala 7 variation there. It says one figure included. And on the top, we have the Mandalorian series logo here in red and that white text, Blurrg and the Mandalorian. And again, a slightly different image here where the Mandalorian is kind of turning towards the Blurrg, you know, from that sort of training, learning to ride montage that was very humorous. And up the top, more images here. So we have sort of a shot of the Blurrg looking at the Mandalorian, a shot of the Mandalorian looking at the Blurrg, and one of just the Mandalorian with his rifle and the Blurrg there peeking in the background. And on the sides, we have even more toy photography. This one I think is really quite fun. This is looking down at the Blurrg kind of roaring and the Mandalorian kind of in a bit of an action shot, like he has just landed in the sand. There's even some sort of sand sort of being kicked up there. Some really expert toy photography. And then of course we have the Mandalorian series logo and the title there, Blurrg and the Mandalorian. On the other end, we have the one only shot of the Mandalorian figure actually riding the Blurrg. So that's a helpful reference there for when we're going to try and put our figure on top of the Blurrg there. We can see that he should be able to sit nicely on the saddle and hold the reins there as well. On the underside here, we have a nice clear image of what's inside the box because of course this doesn't have any windows to see inside. We have the Mandalorian figure with two blaster accessories. We've got a blaster pistol and his armband rifle. We have one Blurrg creature, a saddle, and reins. And I really like the fact that you can actually take them off, because if you want to build up a bit of a Blurrg herd, then you can take those sort of elements off and just have the creatures by themselves, which I quite like. And that's a nice clear image showing what's in the box there. So moving on to the back, another nice clear element here. This particular photo here is the same as the one on the front, so a little bit of repetition here. Again, we can see that they are noting that the figure comes on a backing card. We've got the name there, and again, that image showing what's inside the box and the elements there. The rest of the packaging is actually kind of small in terms of the copyright warning text. We've just got this little box down here and the barcode there, and of course we also have the Vintage Collection logo underneath the chrome racetrack here with the Kenner logo like we have on the front and the Mandalorian logo there. Overall, this is really nice packaging, and just for a little bit of a comparison for scale, here we have it next to a standard action figure. You can see there. So this box, I did a bit of comparison. This particular Blurrg box is the exact same size, shape, and all of the other kind of details to the recently released Mandalorian series Speeder Bike, Scout Trooper, and Grogu. So if you're curious about how big this box is, it is the exact same size as that Speeder Bike one, which I thought was kind of interesting. I wasn't really sure how big this box was because the Blurrg kind of looks like a big bulky creature. I thought maybe the box was going to be larger to fit that creature inside, so I'm really keen to open it up. And of course, if I bring in a deluxe figure, this is the slightly older deluxe style packaging for standard figures that, you know, needed a bit more space. This was when Hasbro was doing their plastic-free packaging era. They have since moved into the bubble carded style for deluxe figures. But we can see that we've got a bit of a copy here in terms of trying to sort of replicate certain elements across the whole Vintage Collection line. I like that everything really sort of matches and looks great. If you like to keep your items in their packaging style, this is a really fun lineup where we can see that chrome racetrack. They all feature the Kenner logo as that throwback to the original trilogy sort of era of packaging styles. And we can also see that they use the same sort of white font for the titles there. Really fun lineup. It's funny to think when we first got the Mandalorian, there were not too many figures, and now we've got this fantastic large range. I'm really excited to really add some bigger creatures like the Blurrg and maybe some more. I'm really crossing my fingers for a Bantha in the Mandalorian series to sort of add to my display, because there's such a fantastic range of figures. But it's fun to see the packaging really matching up to other elements from the range. But of course, now it is time to open this one up, and I can't wait to see. And of course, we're also going to open up the carded figure as well. So let's get opening. So I'm going to be opening up the box by just cutting very carefully through the tape here on this side. Really keen to see how they've packaged the Blurrg inside, and of course we've got a carded figure there inside. Now this is actually really sturdy cardboard, unlike the deluxe figures, which uses sort of the cardboard like the action figure ones. This one is actually corrugated cardboard. It's quite thick, especially for this back part where it's folded over, so it's nice and sturdy, which is great if you like to keep your boxes like I do. So let's pull this tray out and let's see how everything is packaged on the inside. Okay, we're going to have some assembly for the Blurrg. That's how they fit him into that skinniness there. And so the action figure of the Mandalorian is kind of peeking through there, and we can see that we've got the action figure backing cards that are poking there through the back. So I'm going to carefully take him out so we can take a quick little look. I will open him up shortly, but I just want to take a nice look. That was quite a nice way of making sure that this bubble wasn't crushed, because I know that a lot of collectors are really going to want this. And look, it's not even punched there as well. Nice. Okay, so let's have a look. So we do have some plastic, because of course Hasbro has moved away from their plastic-free packaging. I guess in earlier renditions this would have been a paper sort of bag here. And we've also got a very strong elastic band sort of looped around the articulation point of the hips. The eye on that is really cool. It's catching the light. I'm liking that. And we've got one leg in here. Looks like we've got an arm in here, I guess because we've got one attached to the other side. I'm a little bit nervous because we've got some action figure attachment points like those pegs there. And of course we've got his other leg tucked in here. So let's get all of these components out. I'm probably just going to cut through the elastic of this part here. So let's just get my scissors here. The elastic I find is easier to cut than those sort of paper cords that some of the other figures used. Okay, so he is a bit dusty, but I do find that of the ones that are inside the boxes. Oh, we're going to have so much fun at checking out the posing of this. That's a really cool face. I'm liking the gloss on the eyes. That's really cool. And of course, we've got an articulated mouth there as well. A little bit nervous about having to attach the legs. I was kind of hoping that he might be just fully attached there, but I guess because his hips are so sort of wide, they weren't going to fit into this particular box. But I like the fact that the saddle is actually on it. I thought that might be a little bit tricky. It looks like we've got a peg sort of attachment point so we can remove it there. But for, I guess, a lot of collectors, including myself, because it comes with the Mandalorian figure, I want to put him straight on there and ride it. Subsequent later purchases, I'm hoping to add more to my collection. I'm going to probably want them with their saddles off so I can have a bit of a Blurrg herd there. So I'm hoping that these will... Probably going to have to cut the cardboard to get these ones out. So I'll just quickly get everything out and then we can take a closer look at that Mandalorian carded figure. The vintage collection packaging style for single figures is of course heavily referencing the original Kenner action figures of the 1970s and 80s. It's really fun to see the style matching up. Now personally for me, I don't mind if the figures inside the boxes for like deluxe vehicles and creatures, I don't mind if they are loose or carded because I know I'm going to be opening mine up, but I like that Hasbro is still catering for the mint on card collectors. We even have an unpunched card here, and I did like the way that the bubble was well protected inside that box there as well. So we've got a nice promotional image here of the Mandalorian riding atop a Blurrg, but I have to say it is a little bit dark. We can see the Mandalorian is a little bit backlit here, so it is a little bit of a darker image, but I do like that the Blurrg is actually featured on the backing card, even though she isn't actually with this packaging. Of course, this is the figure that comes with the Blurrg, so I like the tie-in there. And of course, they have to pick a different image to many of the other Mandalorian figures that have already come in the vintage collection line. Like previous versions of the Mandalorian, we have an orange accent color here for the nameplate, the Mandalorian. This one is noted as being the Arvala 7 variation because of course that's the planet that he is riding the Blurrgs on. We have a single Mandalorian figure with two accessories, a blaster pistol and the Amban disintegrator rifle. And of course this version of the Mandalorian has a soft goods cloak which is tucked in behind the figure. Really keen to see how that one's going to look on top of the Blurrg. We also have the Kenner logo down the bottom, cutting in a little bit to the face of the Blurrg, but I do understand that that is an important component of the vintage collection packaging style. On the back, because this is a new release, we have the new style of packaging for the back of the card. Instead of the black one with the preview images of other figures from the wave, we now have the accent color from the figure front, here used as a big accent color here on the back. We have an image here of the front of the backing card, and the figure is toy photography posed with the Amban rifle. I do kind of like the toy photography on the back of the backing cards. It gives us a fun posing example there. We can see that he should be able to hold the Amban rifle in two hands. It's a really fun pose. We also have a little bit of a blurb here about the Mandalorian. With the help of the Ugnaught Vapor Farmer Quill, the Mandalorian learns how to tame and ride a Blurrg on the desert planet Arvala 7, and that is repeated in a few different languages. The rest of the backing card here is barcode, copyright, warning, all of that kind of stuff. We also have the vintage collection logo here, and right up the top we can see that this is VC335. We're really making our way through the vintage collection in terms of numbers there. We also just have that bubble sitting quite nicely to the bottom there, so it stands up well on itself, because of course I don't like using the hangers, and this one is unpunched, so if you're going to keep yours mint, then you're going to want to sort of have it standing there. Sometimes, you know, on some figures the bubbles are just a little bit off, so they sort of lean a little bit. This one seems to be standing up really nicely. So now of course I will be opening this figure up very shortly, but I just wanted to take a moment and compare it to for me this is the closest version in terms of these two figures that I have still on the backing card. So I thought it'd be fun to just take a quick little comparison of these two side by side. So first thing I noticed was that the name nameplate for the Mandalorian is dropped down a lot on this one. Obviously, because this one is so tall, he is atop the Blurrg, they've kind of pushed the nameplate up as high as they can go, so not to cover the helmet on this particular one. This one's a little bit more centered between the bubble and the Mandalorian series logo there as well. Of course, we can see the oranges are still the same color behind that. A little bit of variation in the color. This one's just a tiny bit on the darker side compared to this one, but it is supposed to be the same. Now, this one is VC166, where we still have the older style of backing cards. So you can see this one is a little bit more of a reference to the original Kenner action figures, where we had the black background and, of course, the sort of the collect them all iconography here of some of the other figures that were released around the same time as this original Mandalorian figure. We have kind of a similar amount of text, but on this one, because of that color cut-in, the text is actually a tiny bit smaller and reduced in size compared to this one here as well. Interestingly, this one does not have a barcode because this is not designed to be sort of scanned in a store separately to the Blurrg packaging box. So a little bit unusual that this one doesn't actually have a barcode. We can see where it would be on the other figures, and we can also see where the cardboard cutout is there for the hanger. This one, of course, has that sort of plastic reinforcement little section up here, but because this one was not intended to be on a shop shelf there is no plastic reinforcement over the top of that hanger. Just a little bit of a note there. Now, I kind of want to see these two figures beside themselves because, of course, they are going to be, for the most part, very, very similar. Of course, we see in the Mandalorian, he does get a new shoulder piece. So in the first version, he has this kind of cream and blue shoulder. Then when he earns some Beskar, he gets a new shoulder piece. But for the most part, the rest of his armor between these two figures are unchanged. So I was curious to see if Hasbro would actually make any sort of changes, because this one was released quite a while ago. Have they sort of made any tweaks and changes, or is this pretty much the same character? The figure on this one has a plastic cape, which is tucked in behind. You can just kind of see it there. And of course, we can see the plastic around the neck, whereas this one has a soft goods cloak there. We can see that we have the same accessories, but we do have some painting differences here. The new one just is a dark silver metallic finish here. On the original version, we have a painted brown grip, and they're also just packaged facing opposite ways, just a minor difference there. There is also a little bit of a difference in the Amban rifles. The older one is a slightly sort of more of a speckled sort of gray. This one has more of a sort of a strong, dark sort of metallic finish, just a little bit of a different paint difference in that, because there is a little bit of a gold highlight in the midsection of the blaster, which really does show up a little bit better on this new one, which I quite like. So of course, from the neck down, most of the armor is the same. We have more of sort of like a brown weathering on the original version, which is not present on this one. So his helmet looks cleaner. But I was really curious to see just how different these figures are. For the first part, the brown used on his armor components looks to be an almost completely different color. It's a lot more of a rich color, a lot more muted on this new version here. And the color differences extend to some of the other elements as well. The yellow thigh plate is almost more of a brown on this figure, and the blue of that knee armor piece there is a very different one there as well. And also the weathering. The weathering is very different. So the sculpting on all of the armor pieces does look to be the same. I was expecting Hasbro to reuse the pieces. They wouldn't need to change them, but I can see that the weathering that is sculpted into the armor does not have the metallic weathering applied to it. So we can see that sort of battle damage to his chest plate, and we also have battle damage sculpted on the thighs. The yellow thigh plate and the chest plate have these little silver accents, but on this one, there is no silver weathering applied over the top of all of those sort of little damaged parts. And if I take a look, of course, we can see that that battle damage is actually there on the backing card reference image. So unfortunately, it seems like a little bit of a missed opportunity to try and make this a really, really accurate figure, because it should have that silver weathering, as obviously we can see it there even on his thigh plates and on the chest plate. And that's simply missing here on the figure, which is a shame, because of course that older original version does have the weathering on this chest plate. this thigh plate, not on this one here. So they could have added it there as well on this original figure. But it is kind of interesting to see just how different they look. And I'm keen to, you know, open this one up and see it on the Blurrg. And eventually I will get around to opening this one up as well. And we'll do a comparison, you know, of these two out of their packaging as well. But really fun to see that, because of course there was just a very small kind of reference picture of the backing card on the outside of the box. And we had some really cool toy photography, but toy photography is never quite the same to really seeing these things up close and personal. So I want to open this one up and test it on the Blurrg. But of course, for me personally, the thing that I'm most excited about is the Blurrg. So let's get on and construct that Blurrg and check out all of the details. Now let's get this Blurrg assembled. We have the main body with one arm attached and the saddle already in place. Then we have each of the hind legs, one arm, and the reins here, which I'm sure are going to be pretty easy to put on. But I'm a little bit nervous because I was kind of hoping it would come out of the box fully assembled. But we can see that we've got these really large attachment points here for each of those hind legs, and also one of the arms to sort of reduce the width overall so it could fit into that little narrow box. So I'm always a little bit nervous when it comes to sort of attaching pieces, or in some cases sort of swapping pieces around, like some figures come with swappable hands. So I'm going to sort of go a little bit carefully because I really don't want to break a pin. So I'm going to start off with the arm here. We can see the attachment point there, and the articulation is just at the shoulder. We don't have any articulation here at sort of the elbow or the wrist there. Not that I was expecting that. So we can see the attachment point in there. I figure this is, it's probably going to be tight, but let's see how hard it is going to be to sort of push this into place. Oh, okay. They just kind of pushed in. I was kind of expecting it to kind of snap into place or something like that, but that went in fairly easily. And so we can see that we can rotate that one around. That wasn't that hard at all. Cool. Okay, so next up, let's put the thigh pieces in. Of course, with the ball-shaped attachment point, it's possible to actually attach the legs on the wrong side, and I don't know how hard they are to remove. So just making sure that I've got the toes pointing the right way before I snap these into place. And I'm hoping it's going to go on about as easily as that arm did, because I'm a little bit worried that this is going to be quite the pressure to get this attachment point on. Okay. That's taking quite a lot of force. Okay. Yep, that's definitely a hard one to get on. Okay. Yeah. It's going to be a wrestling match. I was hoping it would go on as easily as the arms would. Okay, yeah, it's going to take me a while. Okay, I'm gonna get the legs on for a minute here. So I think I've got the legs in place now. They were actually quite the job to put on. It took a lot of pressing. I sort of had to rest the Blurrg on the floor and really push against the body to get that just kind of slowly went on there. It didn't really make a sort of a snap or a click into place, but it looks really cool now, and just fantastic. It's so exciting. After having wanted this for so long, it's really cool to finally see it in place. So I've still got one accessory left to put on, which are the reins, but I just want to sort of check out some of the facial features and things like that before, because of course the reins do go around the mouth here. So of course it wouldn't be a Blurrg without being able to articulate the mouth, which is really cool. We can see the sculpting of the tongue. It's actually quite textured. It actually kind of feels a bit rough, which is kind of interesting there. And of course we've got these jagged teeth, really fun, and you can see the sculpting on the roof of the mouth there as well. Really cool. And I find that the sculpting here doesn't actually look like a hinge. You know, sometimes you've got sort of like pegs and things like that sort of really show. We've just kind of got, you know, the sort of the sculpting of the mouth sort of coming down there with the jawline, and it's all kind of tucked there on the underside. So it's really nice articulation there for the mouth. And I really like the painting here. We've got a really nice, it's not too sort of a hard line in terms of the sort of the pink tones around the sort of the lips of the creature there, going on to the rest of the body. Really, really cool. I kind of like the fact that you can kind of see inside the mouth quite nicely. Even when the mouth is sort of closed, of course it doesn't close completely up. The teeth kind of do hit in a few places, and this is about as closed as the mouth goes, but I kind of like that. And of course we can go all the way open and it still looks pretty cool. So now I want to put the reins in place. So we can see that they're kind of sculpted towards the back, so you don't need to worry about sort of bending them. They are fairly flexible, of course, and we've just got the bit that's going to go through the mouth. We've got this little silver painted ring here on either side. And it does look pretty cool without it, but of course if I'm going to put the Mandalorian on the top, then I'm going to want to have the reins in place. So I'm just going to slide that into place. Kind of going to close the mouth just a little bit to hold that in place. It fits really well into the tight corners of the mouth there. It looks appropriate. And we can see that when it is in place, the reins curve towards the back right by the sort of structure part here of the saddle. Really cool. So now we have the Blurrg fully assembled. And I have to say, I wasn't sure if it was going to balance on its feet without resting on the tail. And you can see that I have the tail up. It's not touching the desk here. And he balances, or she balances really nicely there. Even with those small little feet, I wasn't too sure if it was going to need a little bit of work there. And of course, we've got the arms that can move a little bit tighter on this side. This was the one that came attached. So it's been in place for a little bit longer. So it's just a little bit stiff, but I've got a good range of motion. It doesn't look quite right to have the arms up there. Kind of got sort of little T-Rex arms that kind of look right, sort of coming down the front here. This was the one that I had to attach on, so it moves just a little bit freer, but we can see that we've got that same sort of range of motion there. Not that I'm really need it, but just having a little bit of movement is just to sort of get a slightly different pose, especially if you're going to have multiples. You're going to want them to sort of be able to just have a little bit of difference there all together. And we can see the legs here. We do have articulation in the hind legs here at the knees and at the ankles there as well. So just attaching them as they were, it stood up pretty well. So I'm probably not really going to play with the articulation much, but I found that they're very tight. You can kind of hear that sort of plastic on plastic noise there. So I guess if you kind of want to do like some toy photography, some different poses, maybe try and sort of get it into a running position. The knees do look a little bit awkward when you kind of articulate them out, but then creatures sometimes can, because we've got the sort of the organic lines of the legs, and then of course we've got these sort of cutouts there, but they look very nice just in the sort of natural position. And the ankles are a little bit stiff as well. I'm not really sure how much movement I'm going to get out of the ankles. There we go. Bit stiff. You can hear that sort of clicking into place there. We do have tiny peg holes on the underside of the feet. Not sure that I'm necessarily going to have to put this one on a display stand. And I can see, now that I've got the whole Blurrg assembled, the really incredible sort of weathering job on this. When I first saw it in the box without the legs on, particularly this one, I thought it was just kind of dusty. Just looking at the body, I could kind of see this kind of speckle to it, which you can kind of see in some of the really close-up sections there. There is a really sort of light speckle all over it, and I thought maybe it was dusty. But when you put the legs on, you can see that it is an all-over kind of dusty weathering, which is just fantastic, because of course Arvala 7 is a dusty planet, and I think it's fantastic that we've got this really light kind of dusty sort of spray over the Blurrg here. You can see it coming in to sort of the leathery texture, particularly on this wide surface of the thigh here. And then this leg, you can see where it's really caught into the sculpting lines. This is the spot where you can really see it the most. And I kind of like the fact that it's quite asymmetrical side to side. And I'm sure that if you buy others, they might even be different to mine here as well. I'm really keen to get my hands on multiples to see if the weathering is a little bit different from Blurrg to Blurrg, but I think it's really cool. You can see it kind of resting, and it really just highlights the sort of leathery texture of the Blurrg with all of that sculpting detail, and it really sort of ties it in. Sometimes when plastic toys are just straight plastic, they kind of look plastic, but I really like just that kind of all over, just kind of slightly dulling of the plastic sort of nature, and we've got this really nice sort of dusty all over. And we've got this really nice kind of sort of airbrushing on the underside here of the mouth, just to give it a different color. It's a little bit more of a brown color compared to the green of the main body. I really like that. Stops a little bit around here. We've got a little bit where it kind of continues past that articulation point, so it's not just a hard stop, but that's really nice there as well. And we've got a little bit of sort of a tone here on the tummy here as well, which just gives it a little bit of a depth rather than just being a solid green toy, which is really, the tail moves very easily, I have to say, which is kind of fun. It really, you can roll it all which way around. It's got a little bit of a rubberiness to it, but because it's so thick, it's not really that flexible, but it's not brittle, and you won't sort of break the tip here. I can just kind of bend that end backwards and forwards, and of course we've got this really easy to move tail, which I think is really nice. It does look a little bit more natural in a few sort of different, you know, if I start to tip it to the side, we've got the sort of the ridge around the back here kind of twisted to the side, but just, I got to appreciate just the smoothness of how well I can move this around, because with not too many sort of body parts that really move, of course, we're going to probably want the thighs in a steady position. It's going to be the arms, the mouth, and the tail that will give us differences if we buy multiples. So just having that sort of little bit of posability there to give some variation if we're going to build up a little bit of a herd of Blurrgs there. Really cool. I'm just so impressed with such small feet. The center of gravity on this. Of course, we have yet to put a figure on the top. That might start to complicate things, but I'm really excited with how this looks. I'm just loving the details. I love the gloss of the eyes. Kind of reminds me of, you know, sort of like doll's eyes, where they're sort of separate, the glass eyes and things like that. It's a really, really nice detail. There is some really fine sort of painted detail there in the eyes. Looking up really close, I believe that's digital printing just on the white dots in the eyes. I can just kind of make out the sort of dots of that sort of telltale digital printing there. But the detail on this is just fantastic. This is why I want Hasbro to make more creatures and beasts, because they just look so cool. There are so many that are not too large. You know, we've gotten large rancors and, you know, other big creatures there in the past. I thought for sure Hasbro was going to make a rancor for the Book of Boba Fett. I'm still waiting on that one. And just a reissue of Banthas. Banthas appear in so many of the series recently. I just don't want more creatures for my Star Wars ones. They're kind of like play sets. They just kind of flesh out scenes a little bit so that your displays aren't just a whole lot of human and droid figures. This looks really cool. I'm so impressed that it stands up really well. I love the paintwork. The articulation is about what I'd expect. Probably even more than I'm ever really going to use. I'm probably not going to really do too much with the thighs because I just like the way that this balances here. So just being able to sort of move the arms a little bit, you know, get some sort of reaching action going there. And of course I can make it. Now moving the mouth will tip the reins just a little bit, but they still stay in there pretty well. I can still, you know, they're not falling out when I move that there. So I will do a bit of a test later on where I'm going to take the saddle off. But first, of course, I want to open up the Mandalorian figure and get this kind of fully complete with Ryder. So I'm going to go grab the Mandalorian and let's open him up so we can check out his details and put him on the Blurrg. So now I have the Arvala 7 Mandalorian figure and the 2 blaster accessories out of the packaging so we can go over the details. So earlier, while this one was still in the bubble, I did a quick comparison to the earlier season 1 figure of the Mandalorian VC335. And during that little quick comparison, I could see that for the most part, most of the pieces look to be the same sculpt, with the exception of the soft goods cape on this figure, and the paint was quite different. So I'm expecting for the most part the sculpting and the articulation will be very similar to that figure, even though I haven't opened mine up yet. But let's go over the details. So of course we've got that shiny silver Beskar helmet here, so iconic. Not much in the way of paint. That earlier version had a bit of sort of a brown weathering to it. This one looks to be pretty clean. Just that metallic finish and the black visor paint job there. That looks like the only painted detail on this particular helmet. Moving down, I think it's really interesting that we have such a different brown in terms of the brown armor plates here, and I am a little bit slightly annoyed with the lack of sort of metal paint, sort of battle damage here on the chest, where we can clearly see those sort of dings in his armor, which would show the silver through, and we just don't have that, especially since it's fairly clearly visible on the backing card promotional image there as well. It's always a little bit annoying when you can see a figure right next to the promotional image that it is obviously trying to replicate, and you can see the differences between the two pictures there. Really odd, because I don't think it would take too much extra time or money for Hasbro to add on those little details. We're also missing that on the thigh pieces as well. Of course, the big difference between this one and VC166 is because this one is a slightly later in Series 1, where we have his new shoulder piece. So this one is kind of the Mandalorian 1.5, as it were, with his original sort of two-tone colored shoulder being version 1. So that's a really nice silver, pretty good close match to the helmet. Of course, we want those to look like they are made from Beskar, so we want the same finish there. That's looking very nice. No paint or sort of weathering details on top of that silver, but I like the shine that it has there. Of course, the other one, he still has his older brown shoulder armor there, which has sort of a bit of a few battle damaged marks there on it as well. Moving down, of course, we've got the same brown used for the gauntlets here. No other painted details on the gauntlets, just that brown color. But of course, we do have a good amount of detail for his gloves here. We've got the yellow fingers, that plate there on the back of the hand with that blue triangle on both sides there as well. So it looks like we've got sort of a rubbery sort of a bandolier shoulder strap here attached to the belt. As he came off the backing card, his hip is a little bit sort of at an angle here, which means that this is just a little bit sort of pulled away from the body. You can kind of see a little bit of a gap in there. But of course, that means that we can move it around. And I think that's pretty useful because, yes, in the back, we can see that we have a peg hole there in the back, which I'm hoping we will be able to attach the M-band rifle worn across the back. So it's kind of helpful that we can move this around to line up the peg hole in both the shoulder strap there and the hole in the back plate there as well. So we'll make sure that those line up nicely there. We can see the back plate, the same brown as a lot of the chest armor there. Not much in the way of extra additional details there. We can see that shoulder strap attaching to the belt here in the back. We've got some interesting little details here on the belt. It just looks like it's all made out of the same plastic there. No real sort of extra painted details. If we just move his arm out of the way, we can take a look at the details here on the belt. I kind of wish the center of these little devices was painted a different color. Here they are all painted silver. They have kind of like a dark red kind of sort of lens in the middle of them on the original props there. They're looking just like a little bit more just sort of painted across there with the silver. We've got some silver details here on the belt and of course on the sort of bandolier strap there as well. Those look nice. No other sort of painted detail here in the back, but it's going to be covered by the cape, so I don't mind that. Moving the other arm out of the way, we can see that we have a holster here on the right sort of hip here. It's again made out of the same sort of a rubbery flexible plastic as the bandolier here, because this is all in one piece. So we should be able to get his blaster pistol in there. We can see that there is a hole in the underside, which sometimes allows just the sort of the barrel just to stick out a little bit further, just to get a nice good seat into the holster there. I like the sculpting details of it. It's got sort of like a very sort of organic sort of leather sort of ripple shape to it. Really nice there. Not just sort of a square box like some of the older figures that we used to get there. The hip plate on the other side, of course, being made in sort of whole part with the rest of the belt and bandolier strap, is also flexible, which should help because, of course, he's going to have to get into a wide-legged pose to sit on the Blurrg. So doing a little bit of a quick test there, he can bend his thighs quite nicely there, and these hip plates being flexible are not really impacting. I can go all the way to there, and I think that that's wider than we're going to have to go, but of course we're going to test that out very shortly. Of course, that was going to be the most important part in terms of the articulation, is going to be his legs. I'm very keen to see how well we can get a pose there. Moving on to the thigh plates, I'm just a little bit annoyed that we don't have the metallic, because of course the Mandalorian is so sort of connected to Beskar. You know, we know that Mandalorian armor on the part is with Beskar, but it's talked about so much in the Mandalorian series, and it's sort of, you know, we see it being forged and made and stuff like that. So having those little elements there of of his Beskar armor sort of shining through the paint here is a shame, especially since we've got perfect little battle damaged parts there in the sculpting, just begging to be sort of highlighted with a little bit of silver there. I don't know, maybe some fans will try and sort of rectify that, but with, you know, some skillful paint application themselves there. We've got a lot of different paints here on the lower legs, of course. He's got a lot of different elements. We've got a blue, a dark brown, more of a red brown here, dark brown here on the other side with some paint application here around on the knee part. The leg on this one was just a little bit turned. I think it looks a little bit better if I line it up a little bit straighter there. Of course, we've got the silver details there around the top of that leg there as well. For the most part, the paint looks pretty clean. Apart from the sort of the lack of weathering, I'm not really noticing much in the way of sort of misaligned paint, which I'm pretty happy about. Some really nice sculpting details, like you can see just the little sculpting lines on the thigh, which would be for sort of like their fabric details of the original costumes. Some really nice details there. Really cool. I'm just gonna have to see if yeah, the belt on mine is just a little bit sort of lower here on this side. That's just the way that he was. But because it's a little bit sort of rubbery, I'm sure I can sort of play around with the sort of the position on that with a little bit of careful adjustment later and just get that a little bit straighter. Who knows? It will probably not even really matter once I start playing with his hips and getting him into position on the Blurrg. But of course, one of the highlights about this that I really love is the soft goods cloak. I love soft goods, especially in the 3.75-inch scale line. Now this one feels like sort of like a polyester. Hasbro uses some different fabrics for different cloaks and capes and things like that. And now this one kind of feels kind of similar to some of the Vader cape fabric I have seen. It's not sort of a cotton t-shirt, it's much more sort of a slippery fabric. It does have a few creases here because it was tucked in behind him in the packaging here, but not too much. It kind of looks like just sort of like natural creasing with the cape. And of course it's sort of a nice sort of level there, cutting off at the back. It doesn't go all the way down. And I really like the way that it is stitched around the neck. This is really clean. We can see that we've got a little bit of a stitch line here on the right side, but then we've got it sort of swooshing around here. We don't have a stitch line on the other side. So you can actually kind of pull it down a little bit over that shoulder, which is really nice. I really like the way this is fitting. It just, of course, has a raw edge, so I'm going to be careful with that, not to sort of damage it, but it's not as prone to fraying as some of the other fabrics I've seen. So this looks really nice. Really liking that soft goods cape. It looks really cool. And of course, because it's soft goods, we can move it out of the way and get that blaster rifle attached to the back. Yeah, okay, so let's just do a really quick sort of test of the articulation. So of course, a lot of the Mandalorian's personality comes through his sort of subtle sort of body language, particularly around with his helmet. So some really nice fluid movement. And of course, now this one does not have a head underneath. Most of the Mandalorian figures in the vintage collection line don't have a head underneath, which does kind of fit. You know, he's not really taking his helmet off, especially in season 1, which of course this is a season 1 version of the Mandalorian. So it makes sense that there's no head underneath here, but we've got some really nice movement there, nice and fluid. And I like that the cape is not really being twisted around much as well. I can sort of move it around there a little bit, but for the most part, it's not moving completely when I'm turning the head. And of course, soft goods cape means that it's not going to get in the way of the shoulder articulation. So just trying to move the cape just a little bit carefully over here. You can kind of see that this shoulder piece is up over the shoulder when I am moving the arms around. I was wondering how that one might fit, because this one goes underneath there. You can see it sort of fitting underneath the shoulder strap and just kind of just tucking into the shoulder piece there. It's a little bit harder to show because it's so close to the neck, but this one's actually fitting up over the shoulder, which means that we can still get the arms up quite high, but I like that. Okay, so I'm expecting pretty standard articulation in terms of the arms. Of course, we're going to want him to hold the reins. because personally, I know most of the time I often reference wanting to get some good sort of accessory poses, you know, characters that come with weapons. I generally pose them with weapons. Now, of course, this one is going to be a bit different because I want him riding the Blurrg. So we can see that he's got a nice trigger finger there, quite accented because of the yellow tips to the fingers of his gloves. So I'm hoping that that will fit into the blaster sort of trigger guards quite nicely. The other hand is more of a classic sort of C grip there. I'm hoping those hands will hold on to the reins quite nicely, but I will still test the weapons there. And of course, we're going to test the blaster pistol in there as well. So he has sort of that classic mid-torso articulation, which is going to be a little bit limited by the shoulder strap, but it's a little bit easier to kind of get him into the position you want by moving that strap down off the shoulders, and then we can kind of move him around side to side. Of course, because if he's going to be sitting down, then it's going to be the upper body that's going to do most of the posing to get into sort of those subtle changes. So of course, moving him around a lot is going to misalign that hole there. So I'm probably going to be wanting to get that aligned if I want to put the Amban rifle on his back. But if I don't want it on his back while he's sitting on the Blurrg, then it doesn't matter. I've got free movement there to really move his torso around there. So much personality from this helmet. I'm really liking the way that I can move that around. That's really cool. So of course I tested it out a little bit earlier, but we can get some pretty wide hip movement there. We can kind of see the articulation there looking up at the sort of points there. And of course, quite fluid. I'm liking how smooth. It's not really fighting me. He can go to there, a little bit more of a limit here because of the point of this armor plate. This one is a little bit smaller, so it's fitting in there a little bit. So there's just a little bit of a difference in how high these two legs can go. And of course, the knees. I'm just really impressed with how smooth everything is bending. I often have a little bit of a fight with action figures straight out of the packaging. Their joints can be a little bit tight. I can get quite tight there on the knees. Again, a little bit different because he just has asymmetrical armor, so I can get quite tight on this one. This one, because he's got these accessories here and this bit more of sort of armor plate here in the back, it's hitting just a little bit earlier, but again, pretty tight. And he has quite high articulation. Sometimes on the ankles, it cuts down into sort of the ankle area. This one's a little bit up at the top of the boot, but we still got some very good movement there. And again, I'm not fighting with it. It's nice. It's nice and kind of just a smooth movement, not floppy, but just nice and smooth. So I'm really hoping that we'll be able to get into sort of a bit of a Blurrg riding pose, probably something a little bit like that. Really cool. Okay, so let's do a quick little look at his accessories. So hoping we'll be able to get this attachment point of the Amban rifle. You can see the dark color on this through the packaging. It looks like it's just a slightly different paint job to the one that came with VC166. We've got that different sort of disintegrator end being a different gray to this. I really like the dark color here. Of course, we've got this metallic gold here in the midsection, and we've got a brown end there, a circular trigger guard there for the fingers, but I really want to see how well this is going to fit onto his back. So I'm going to try and sort of line up those little peg holes there. Okay, that fits in really quite nicely, quite sturdily. So I can kind of get the cape. It's always a little bit tricky to kind of flick them in underneath, but yeah, that works. Looks nice. So if I straighten out his legs, we can kind of see how long that would go. It might hit the back of the Blurrg. I'm definitely going to test that out. We might have to sort of, because it's a rectangular peg, I can't really pivot it much. It's not a circle. I can't sort of swish it, so it's a little bit more of a steeper diagonal shape there. But I can just kind of tuck it underneath a little bit, so you can kind of get it around that, but it looks really good. So if you want to use him perhaps posing beside the Blurrg, we can put the rifle across his back like that. And let's test out, oh, that's actually quite a good fit. That took a little bit of a wriggle to get him off. So the blaster pistol is just a straight, very sort of flat and skinny blaster pistol. We can see that circular sort of cutout there for the trigger guard. We don't have any other paint here. On that earlier version, there was a brown grip. This one is just a full metallic there. We can see that dark metallic color there. Some really nice detail. I like the small accessories. They are generally quite easy to put into onto the hand. So I'm hoping that this will fit into his hand. And there we go. Wow, that trigger guard, that was perfect. Nice. You can see because we've got that yellow tip to his glove, how well that fits in there. Really nice. That just went in there. Absolutely no worries. Oh, I like it when I don't have to wrestle with them, because I know you've got a little bit of flex sometimes with the fingers to kind of get them in there, but I really feel like Hasbro knows the accessories that are going to go with the figures. The hands should hold the accessories that they come with, and that's a really nice pose there. So of course I'm probably not going to have that in his hand if he's riding a Blurrg, so let's go and stow it in his holster here. So it's got a long barrel, so I'm thinking that one might poke out the bottom. Yes, we can see there. Really nice, fits in there nice. We've got a nice big sort of grip here so we can pull that out. Really nice. I like being able to stow the accessories that are included with the figure on the figure. It just kind of sort of fleshes them all out. Looks really cool. Okay, let's do a quick little hold of the armband rifle, because this was such a cool accessory, you know, that reference back to the holiday special, of course. So these ones can be tricky. I'm not quite sure which way is going to be the best way to get it into his hand here. Let's see. Can I get it past his thumb? Okay. Again, that finger goes into the trigger guard nicely. There, we can see that. Of course, it's a long one, but yeah, I'm glad that he can hold that really well. And of course, if I'm going to be posing him two-handed, I can probably get his hand to kind of rotate around a little bit, get him to do a two-handed pose like that. His thumb just wants to wriggle down a little bit, but yeah, I'm sure I could spend a bit of time and get him into a cool armband rifle pose if I want to do some cool sort of scenery with him standing next to the Blurrgs, because of course if you're going to buy a couple of Blurrgs, then you can put this guy in some different scenes, so that is useful if he's, you know, coming with the accessories, so we can put him in some other scenes, because he does spend a lot of time in this particular armor style there. So be quite useful to actually have multiples of him, because he's such a good figure. I like just the posability, the detail. Just a shame about the weathering. To be honest, I don't know if I got a dud that's just missing weathering, but yeah, it just that one little element, I think, that is just sort of my one critique about this particular figure. I like the way that he holds the accessories. Everything else is great. I love the soft goods cape. Just that weathering is the one point that I don't like about it. Okay, so we've gone over all of the details. Oh, okay, there's a few articulation points. I was very excited about the accessories there. A couple of articulation points that I missed. Of course, we have the swivel point at the top of the thighs. That is also going to help us sort of rotate his thighs out a little bit to get on the Blurrg, in case we kind of need a little bit of rotation there as well. So I forgot about that one. And of course the hands, we've got the small little rotation there with the hands. Now this one, we've got a little bit of a side to side rock there as well, and side to side on this one here as well. It doesn't give us a lot of movement because of these gauntlets here are just kind of cutting in a little bit close to that articulation point. So I'm not getting a lot of rocking, and I find that they're such small articulation points. I generally don't like to do much more than just rotation with the hands. But yeah, fantastic figure. There's just another little quick look at the articulation and sculpting there on the back. And one fun thing about Mandalorians in particular, the vest that they wear that helps them attach their chest armor to their sort of a flight suit is a perfect spot to hide that sort of upper torso articulation. You can see it there in the back there as well. That works so well for Hasbro. Really cool. Oh, he's such a cool figure. I'm really excited. Fantastic. I was kind of a little bit tempted to keep him on his bubble, because, you know, sometimes the ones that come with the deluxe sort of vehicles and things are harder to find. You know, of course, if you want a second one, you've got to buy the whole thing a second time. So I have to admit, I was a little bit tempted to keep him on the backing card, especially with that really cool Blurrg. But I thought, no, I want to get this one on the Blurrg, and perhaps if I can get my hands on a second Blurrg, maybe I'll keep that one carded. But now that I've seen him out of the backing backing card. I think he's just so cool. I'll probably want to open up a second one when I can get my hands on a second one to add him to another scene because of just the detail on this one. He's so cool. I love this cape. I'm just a fondness for fabric capes over the plastic ones. It just really looks cool. Okay, so let's grab the Blurrg and check out the poses and get these two together. I'm so excited. Spending a few minutes, this is my first attempt at getting the Arvala 7 Mandalorian figure posed riding the Blurrg, and I think it looks really cool. After months of waiting, it's finally really exciting to see them all together. So I have the Mandalorian figure holding the reins in both hands. Because the reins are flexible, it does take a little bit to get him into the hands, but it does work there. And I was even able to get the armband rifle attached to the back of the figure there. It is a little bit straighter because the attachment point for the armband rifle is a rectangle. I can't swivel it to get it a little bit more of a steeper angle across the back, like pictured on the backing card. We can see the rifle just across the back of the Mandalorian, kind of peeking out the side, but it's a little bit straighter here. It does touch the Blurrg here in the back, but it isn't really affecting the way that I can get the Mandalorian to sit. He's still looking pretty upright, so I'm happy about that. And you can see that even with the figure atop the Blurrg, I can pose it with the tail up. I don't need to rest it down on the tail in order to get everything balanced, which I was really hoping for. I wanted to kind of look natural, so because the tail wouldn't be touching the ground if the Blurrg was running. So I'm not going to play around with the articulation on the knees and ankles too much. I want the figure to be steady, but if you enjoy toy photography, I'm sure you could get some really fun sort of running poses outside in the grass or the sand, or I'm sure there's going to be some really cool photos of this. Now, I do need to point out, it looks pretty cool from the side, but when I turn it to the side, you can see that my figure is kind of rocked to the side a little bit. So because the saddle is a separate sculpted piece that does attach over the Blurrg, it's kind of made the Blurrg's back a little bit wider. And I found it actually kind of hard to get the seat of the figure as low down to the figure as possible. I didn't want him sort of floating up above the saddle. So to try and get his thighs touching, I have his left thigh there resting on the saddle, and his right thigh is kind of, you can see through the center, is resting on the back of the Blurrg rather than the saddle. It's more of his knee and calf that is resting on the saddle there. But because the Blurrg is a two-legged creature, I kind of think of it sort of rocking side to side a little bit while it's running. So I imagine the Mandalorian kind of rocking side to side. So it's not the most ideal, and this is my first attempt. I'm sure I might be able to get a little bit of a closer one, but that's the best way that I found during my sort of experimentation of getting him into the pose. So if I wanted to pose him at this side, I would probably try and rock the character to this side just to kind of get everything aligned there. Now, of course, that may not be so much of an issue if Hasbro had sculpted the saddle as part of the Blurrg, but I do actually quite like the fact that it's separate. So if you want to army build the Blurrgs, they don't look awkward all wearing saddles, that you can have ones that just sort of don't have any of sort of the human elements there. They can be wild Blurrg. You can sort of add them to other scenes and things like that. Maybe you could tuck a few in the back of your Ewok village, of course, referencing those original 80s movies where the Blurrgs first appeared. I think that would sort of be like a fun Easter egg moment there. And of course, it's kind of interesting that this Blurrg didn't come with a quill figure like the Hot Toys version. You could buy the Hot Toys Blurrg by itself with a Mandalorian figure or with quill. So of course, I do actually have a quill figure, but as you can see, mine is still on the backing card, so I don't have him loose in order to test on the Blurrg. But of course, now that I have the Blurrg, I'm going to be opening this one up very, very shortly, and I'll be testing him on the Blurrg when I open this one. So I'm very keen to test that one out shortly. But another thing that I wanted to quickly just do a little bit of a comparison now that I've got this one out and build is take a quick little look at some of the other Blurrg toys that are also available. As a big fan of the creatures of Star Wars, I do try to collect as many as I can where possible. So of course, here are 3 different Blurrg toys from some different manufacturers. I do also have the Hot Toys Blurrg, but it is very large and a different scale, so I won't be including that one in this comparison. Over here, we have the Funko Pop vinyl version with the Mandalorian as a rider on top. Now this one doesn't pose. We can't move the mouth or the hands or the legs. The only thing that moves is of course the head, because it is a bobblehead. Now here we have the Hasbro Vintage Collection one that I just opened up, and here also from Hasbro is the Mission Fleet version. So this one, because it is sort of targeted to a younger crowd, does actually have articulation. We can move the arms, the legs, and of course the mouth here as well. But we can see the figure doesn't ride the Blurrg quite as well as this Vintage Collection one does. It just kind of sort of sits on the top in a little bit more of a speeder bike pose there. This one was the first one that I got. I was so excited to see the Blurrgs in the Mission Fleet range that I get to grab that one as well, because for a long time that was the only Blurrg that I had. And then I had the Funko statue, which is just fantastic, and now this one. Of course, I am a fan of the Funko style. I think creatures in particular look really cute, especially with the large eyes, even though this one's a little bit frowny with the teeth there. But I'm just so happy with this one. It looks really cool alongside these ones. I wonder if the popularity of this one, because of course we've not really had much in the way of creatures, I'm hoping this one will sell really well and perhaps signal to Hasbro that it would be kind of fun to see a Blurrg in the Black Series 6-inch scale. Honestly, we've had some larger 6-inch scale ones, you know, like Tauntauns and Jabba the Hutt. I think it would be really fun to see a Blurrg in a 6-inch scale. That would just be really cool. If Hot Toys can do it in the 12-inch figure scale, then I'm sure Hasbro could do it in a Black Series scale. That would be really cool. But that's just me, because I love Blurrgs and Star Wars creatures, so I'd love to see that. Overall, I really love this. I love the paint job on the Blurrg, the articulation, the fact that it balances. I don't think I could really change anything about the Blurrg. It's just fantastic. The one thing is just like the posing of the legs. Sometimes I wonder if it would be better to kind of have, I think back to a very old version of Princess Leia as Jabba's slave, where she came with sort of a sculpted lower body so that she could sit in that sort of pose next to Jabba, rather than sort of having to take the articulation of an action figure and kind of get her into that seated position. And sometimes I wonder whether it would have been better to do a version of the Mandalorian where we could sort of pop him in half at the waist and have sculpted legs to fit on the Blurrg. I know that's quite different from what we expect from the Vintage Collection. We're looking for articulation and all of the detail, but sometimes it can be a little bit hard to work with action figure articulation, because it's not quite going to mimic sort of the way that human bodies kind of sit, and sort of the weight of a human that's going to sort of mold to the saddle of a creature. But I think this is pretty good, to be honest. I like the fact that when I pose him from this side, he looks really cool. So for now, I'm probably going to have him facing this way there. Really excited. After all of that waiting, I finally have a Blurrg for my 3.75-inch Star Wars action figure collection. This has been so much fun. It felt like a long wait, even though it was actually fairly quick for Hasbro to get this through their pipeline and onto store shelves. And I know I'm desperately keen to get my hands on more of them. I want to have a few. You know, we saw a cluster of them in The Mandalorian, and I just think they're so fun. I need more of them. I want to hopefully get Quill on one and have a couple of others in the background. You know, you can never have too many creatures in the Star Wars. There are so many, and I really hope Hasbro makes some more. Give us Tauntauns and Dewbacks and Banthas, and, you know, a new Rancor for Book of Boba Fett and all of that fun stuff. This has been so much fun. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another awesome Vintage Collection figure and creature, and had just so much fun checking out all of the details. I can't believe I finally have this one for my collection. It's been a fun day. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again really soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a Vintage Collection fan, I recently opened up the Mandalorian Mines of Mandalore figure, VC312. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole Vintage Collection playlist. This is the way.